Hi, everyone. I'm introducing two very experienced people who co-authored the book, The Power of Process. Eric Ethington and Matt Zaker are bringing a joint quantity of 60 years of experience in leading, studying, and advancing lean product and process development, also known as LPPD. Eric, a coach and the program manager of the LPPD initiative at LIE, joined LEI after capping a career in the industry. He gained leadership experience implementing lean practices in defense, aerospace, consumer products, and financial industries at Delphi's Energy and Engine Management Division, Delphi's corporate headquarters, and Textron. Matt earned his stripes through staff and management level roles, including several under the guidance of former Toyota mentors for Chrysler, University of Michigan, Gelman Sciences, Delphi and Powell, now part of Dana, before joining GE Nuclear in 2021 and later GE Healthcare in 2023. Matt coached organizations through his consultancy and as a LEI faculty member and coach for LEI's LPPD initiative, where he worked closely with both smaller entrepreneurial-minded companies and the larger global companies alike. Thank you, both of you. I'm sure this is going to be very, very interesting.
Okay, well, thank you, Sharon. Thanks for the intro. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you're at. We want to start out with this slide, and it's talking about seeing the ugliness, and we want to suggest that there is a lot of ugliness sometimes in our own processes and worlds that maybe having a different lens in front of us might help us see that. And here I'm not calling my own children ugly. The ugliness is this photograph that was taken probably close to 30 years ago was ruined by the wallpaper behind it. This was our second house, and we had bought it. We're ignoring the decorating and so on. But the bottom line is it almost took a whole view of looking at this through a camera lens to get us to realize there's something we need to do differently. And what we want to suggest here is that this lens of confirm that we're going to dig into a little bit today here is what's going to help any organization going to transition from just going from the ugliness of typical launches to be ready for launches proactively. The key things that we're going to really talk about, we've broken this into three basic sections. Why is this even important? Matt will talk about that. Then I will talk about what better could look like, and then we'll transition right back to Matt to talk about how to get started maybe next Monday morning. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Matt.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And again, thanks to everyone that's on here. So just as a refresher, Eric talked about this, phase called confirm. So we've on the bottom right, Eric and I published a book a couple of years ago based on a lot of the process development learning that we've had the last 25 to 30 years each. And it's in the book introduced this 6COM model. It's something, again, that we learned from all of our time developing products, work, not just in industry, manufacturing, but in hospitals, service processes, et cetera. And again, just to kind of frame everyone, ground everyone, what the 6COM model is. The con, the CON just refers to the first three letters of the six words there. So, and from a high level, just if you look at the bottom, we've got learning and executing. But whenever you're developing a new product, new process, and in this case, we're talking about a new process, it's really, there's a learning phase and an executing phase, and kind of that dash line down the middle. So upstream from the dash line, you have context, concepts, conversion. You have this convergence that has to happen of all these ideas. And then after that, you move into execution, where you're configuring the best known idea or the best process that you've agreed upon. And there's a confirmation stage and a continuous improvement stage that lasts forever after that. But in our experience, these are the 6 phases to developing any new process. Again, and the 4-2-1 on here just refers to you want to look at multiple options. You may have heard the term set-based concurrent development, and this helps, or 7 ways, but look at how many options you decide are the best. It doesn't have to be 4, it could be 6, 7, 3, but the point is to test multiple options early on and learn, and that's because that's that learning phase. So but the challenge in this model is where do you start? This is what we're saying is kind of a target condition to go for, but and based on my experience and Eric's experience, we didn't start with right from the far left. We're trying to develop new processes right from the start with lean. The hypothesis that we'll talk about today is a good place to start. Could be just one step upstream from what most organizations currently do today, is where they launch something and they don't have much process design work going into it, is this confirm stage that is the last gate in the process before you launch it. So we'll talk about that and its relationship to the time phase of when you can do it. So with that, you can go to the next slide, Eric. So in all situations, what's a big question to ask is, what's this worth, right? Or, is the juice gonna be worth the squeeze? We're gonna do all this effort, and just to kind of put this in context here of, what are we missing out on? And a challenge for you to think about, when your organization is, I call this the $300 million question, because this was something that hit Eric and myself at a personal level in an organization we used to work at. It was really this hidden crisis of, whether you're in a production business, digital business, a healthcare business, you're typically launching new processes or new production operation systems every year, right? Whether it's for new products or new capacity. And what we found in our experience, that the hidden cost of poor launches, of not having a good way to test and actually design things before you launch them, can cost 1% or more of your revenue. And just the 300 million here is, Eric and I used to work at an organization where we had $30 billion of revenue annually, and a leader tasked our organization once to really understand and do a study of how much does it cost our organization in revenue, or actually just cost. What does it cost us for these poor launches every year that we do? And it was $300 million. So that was a huge amount. So even if we could save a third of that, but more importantly, it wasn't just the cost, it was the lost, customer sales, the satisfaction with the customers, and even more importantly, we were launching things maybe that weren't as safe for the employees. We didn't get the ergonomic issues or other things designed out. We ended up doing those things after the fact, where it cost a lot more money. So, and again, just the key point here is the same crisis occurs in many operational systems. We see it. Eric and I have been fortunate to work in hospitals, just clinics, service processes, et cetera. And the same thing, happens over and over, right? As we get, we don't take the time to do this process design early on and debug it before we get to launch. And again, the shame in all this is, right, we have unplanned and unbudgeted, resources and people that get thrown at these chaotic processes once they're launched. And it's very difficult to get to that level of stability. And then, once we get it to some level of stability, it gets permanently turned over to that local team or local staff, and they're just trying to keep it together with, sometimes band-aids and shoestring. And it's hard enough to do that, let alone try to improve it. So, just a thing to think about as you reflect on your situation is there a way to, value or question how much money you waste on that. So then this gets into we're trying to break this rework or this poor launch crisis that you may be experiencing. So just Eric and I like to reference this article that Jim Womack, we've been fortunate enough, Eric and I, to work with Jim for over 20 years now, with our work with LEI and previously with Delphi. And Jim wrote a really great article for the Lean Post for LEI's website in 2008. So it's about 15 years ago. And he introduced this word called Tozen that we'd never heard before. And it hit exactly what we were getting at. But Tozen is a definition is really, it's like something that, happens as a matter of course, but it's really a way to look at it is it's engineering rework is really what Jim meant by it. And what he meant is a lot of times he goes and sees new plants, or he'll go out and walk through plants, a new product is launched and there's all this Kaizen going on. People are enthusiastic, but really what they're doing is engineering rework because the work was not done properly during the development stage to debug it or actually make things, perfect before it launched. So that's Tozen. So it's challenging people to, look at things and wonder, are you really doing Tozen instead of Kaizen, and trying to move upstream? So that's what ends up being this development rework. So it's a very important point. And we were complacent early in our career, and we thought this was what Kaizen was, right? You got great enthusiastic teams together taking 50-60% of the workout, but the root cause was the next product coming down had those same design issues in it, and you were doing the same thing over and over. So it's a realization that can take some time, but it's something to think about as well when you self-reflect. So as we talk, going back, just to kind of frame it back to this 6-con model and this confirm. So again, the ideal situation that you want to get to is you have this early design involvement up front, right from the idea phase. If you look at the top, as far as the timeline, but a good place to start, and this is again where we started, was just with this confirm phase early on, because you can get quick learning, and then you can start to apply it to other products that are in the system or new processes that you're developing. In some cases, from idea to delivery in this state, it could take years, it could take months, could take weeks, depending on what business you're in. But a good place to start is with confirm, because you can get quicker feedback and realize if you're making an impact. The risk is if you start too far upstream, it may be years or months even before you learn if you're making that impact, and the organization may not be able to wait that long. But again, start with confirm. That's our hypothesis, and then push your way upstream from there to get better and better with each new development. And with that, Eric's going to outline and talk about how this can be actionable within the confirm phase.
Thanks, Matt. And yeah, Matt's mentioned a bunch of different types of processes or products, and we do try to stress that this isn't just a manufacturing thing. But regardless of the type of product or process that you might, experience or create in your own world, they all go through some sort of early work on design. Then there's some sort of, you start selecting equipment and suppliers and different things. Stuff gets installed, and then eventually it gets tested, hopefully before you launch. Sometimes that might not really happen, but ideally it does get tested. But what do we mean by tested in this confirm phase? The fundamental question that we suggest people ask is your value stream capable of providing value? And we deliberately use the word value stream. We're kind of, borrowing from the idea that Al Ward, had in his early notes and in the book that he and Durward Sobek had done, related to the role of development being to create successful or profitable value streams. And so it isn't just as simple as does all the equipment work or does the piece of software work, but does the value stream work? And can you objectively see that capability? And really what we want to be able to do is to see that capability in an objective way, and then be able to decide, are the problems we're uncovering, because we're certainly going to uncover problems, but are they big enough to ask for help? Or are we just uncovering them early enough that we can deal with them and get them solved before we get to launch? Because it is much, much easier, as any of us can attest to, it's much, much easier to solve these problems before the customer's sitting there waiting for their value to show up on their doorstep. And so sooner is definitely better in this case. And we want to suggest there's really kind of 3 steps. Number 1 is understand what contributes to value. So have like an actual reflection on what is it that the customer values. Build a scorecard of some type. That scorecard, unfortunately, is going to be situational. And the reason I say unfortunately is I know everybody would like the scorecard. If it was that easy, we just email it out and we wouldn't do this session. And then test and learn. And part of that learning is not only learn by making the improvements or solving the problems, but it's also kind of that learning of how big of problems do we endure or do we take on before we maybe need to escalate up the help chain. So I'll talk about each of these individually, what we really mean by them. First, understanding what contributes to value. A lot of ways going about this. One thing that we found helpful, and maybe you've seen an equation like this, it might vary by industry. In healthcare, it often has appropriateness instead of safety. But the importance about this equation is that, you know, the items in the numerator you want bigger, and the items in the denominator you want smaller. And if you do that, the value mathematically is going to go up. The other thing is kind of subtle about this equation is if anything in the numerator is 0, the value is gone. And so that's also a subtlety. But this is really a good place to start to think about what would you build a scorecard around? What elements might you put into a scorecard? And you need to ask that question, what are the critical few criteria? You got to be careful because this could really quickly turn into 100 items that you'll never be able to keep track of, never be able to measure, you won't be able to standardize. But what are the critical few criteria that impact the value equation? An example for quality might be just flat out the incoming part quality, like parts per million defective, or it could be your mistake proofing readiness. There's a lot of ways of thinking about what are some key criteria that really are going to affect that quality element in the value equation or in what my customer values. Then the second thing to think about are what are the performance targets for those criteria, because there should be some sort of target. And we often say, you know, as a hint, is look at the assumptions in the business case. Hopefully we didn't just go out and start buying stuff. Like someone made some assumptions. We figured that equipment would perform at a certain capability. Things would have a certain cost associated with them. There would be certain uptimes, there'd be certain yields, that kind of stuff should have been written down somewhere. And if it didn't get written down, here's the time to get that established. So what is successful going to look like? And by repeating this exercise, you can develop the elements and the criteria for an objective scorecard. Then I've got in here, okay, the next thing that Matt and I always talk about is, okay, now let's start building a scorecard. Incoming parts per million is highlighted there. You can see the value elements down the left side. And this is just an example. It isn't the example that's going to necessarily work for you, but it might be a jump off point. But again, with this, there's some questions to consider. One would be how much weight should you assign to each of those elements? If we're going to go and do some math here, do we just weight them all equally? There's some organizations I've worked with where we tend to weight things that can be affected closer to launch more heavily versus maybe things like you see system readiness is a little bit lighter in the weighting because that's all stuff that should have been done before we even are getting that close to launch. And we don't want the launch team wrapped up around that stuff, but that's stuff that still needs to be monitored. The other thing is, how are you going to objectively measure and calculate each of these criteria? We really need to think about what is the way we calculate incoming parts per million, or how are we going to measure our mistake proofing readiness? And that's important for a couple of reasons. One, so that when you do the actual math, you can do it consistently so you can see progress. But the second thing is those formulas or those methods of calculation are going to tell you what data you need to collect when we actually exercise the system. And I almost hate to say this, but we did this one time, like the very first time we ran something like this back when I was doing launch management type stuff. And we didn't do a really good job at identifying that stuff ahead of time. So we had this 2-hour run and we all get together at a conference room to talk about how it went. And then we actually didn't have the data to do the calculation, and that's not a good thing. So please don't do that, okay? So we really need to think about how are you going to do these calculations, and then who's going to collect what data. Then to kind of build off of this, we want to start now, okay, how do we test this? And to test, we want to find hidden problems and learn by addressing them. And again, refreshing on everything, it's this idea of objectively seeing the capability. And one of the things to think about is, when would we do different types of tests? And again, this is going to what makes sense in your own organization. How do you test the value stream? There might be in your own organization or in your own industry, there might be natural touch points or natural runs that you have to do because of the customer or government regulations or something. And so leverage some of those, but don't just do them for the sake of doing them. Make sure you're doing them with an eye towards exercising the whole value stream. We used to have in the auto industry, and we still do, the PPAP trial runs, a production parts approval process. And we would run the system, but there was so much data we could have gleaned and really gotten after that we didn't, because we were just doing what was minimally required to check that box or to meet that milestone. And so the point here is, think about what your test plan would be. And again, this looks like, wow, that's a lot of work, but you're going to be running a 24/7 test plan once you hit launch. So again, think about doing it earlier, learning earlier. Another thing to think about is, as you do this test plan, is to increase the stress you place on the system as you get closer and closer to launch. What I mean by that is, early on, you might do a 2-hour run just to test certain aspects of the system. Later on, you might do a 4-hour run and put one changeover in there. Later on, yet you might put multiple changeovers in and rotate operators. And I've even seen where we would force parts that were dimensionally correct, but at opposite ends of the tolerance spectrum, we'd force them into the system, because early on, your suppliers are pre-sorting everything for you and it all goes really easy. And then when you get into starter production, all that variation comes in. So we force variation in. So think about how you might increase what makes sense in your case to increase stress on that system. And then another thing to think about is, the scorecard implies that we're scoring this, and there's going to be some way of saying, do we need to ask for help or not? One thing that we found helpful is to increase the scoring required for passing as you get closer and closer to launch. So early on, a run that maybe scores low doesn't necessarily need to run up the help chain and say, hey, we need all these extra resources. We might expect to be finding a lot of problems early on, but as you get weeks from launch, those same problems are a real big issue at that point in time. And so this is just kind of showing that idea of progressive scoring. When is a problem really a problem? One example that we've used in the past is, that early trials, a 50% was good enough. But as you got close to your start of production, it was like, no, we needed above a 90. And then the two categories that were kind of lower weighted, the safety and system readiness, needed to be perfect. So they had to be perfect. Your only variation could actually be in maybe delivery or quality elements at that point. And again, this will vary by industry. So this is just showing what maybe a scorecard could work out to be. And at the bottom, it's, this is an early one, but it's only 47%. And then when you start looking into the data and asking why, well, mistake proofing failed in this particular case. And as you get down into the other things, some of the forced dimensional variation affected assembly. We also didn't have the people trained properly. So we didn't, so this caused us to dig back into our training plan, look at the tolerances and are they reasonable? And is our fixturing doing what it's supposed to be doing? And also getting into the mistake proofing. Is it, why isn't it where it needs to be? Why isn't it working the way it should? With that, I'm going to pass this back to you, Matt, to just talk about, okay, so how to get started.
Thanks, Eric. So, so we look at this as how to get started on Monday morning. You can actually start tomorrow morning and Friday morning if you really wanted to, but just as a go to, okay, this is all great stuff, but what can I do if I was interested in this and want to take action? What can I do? So again, on this slide are a number of questions to help you get started. We've highlighted the key ones, of the 9 that are here. There's 4 that we think are good that you could ask yourself right now. These questions there's each of the cons has a set of questions to guide you. But with this one, the 4, which process are you going to pick that you would like to test this out? So pick something that's real, and that's the first key question. The next key question is, how are you going to exercise and verify this sustainability across the entire value stream? Like Eric said, exercise it across. Then another key question here is, does the progressive scoring provide the right help at the right time, and does it need adjusting? So you may pick measures and weighting that don't highlight those issues early enough. So these are some of the key questions of the 9, the 3 that are highlighted here. And like I said, if you go to the next slide, Eric, we're going to leave a few minutes here for questions, but just on the left, I want to highlight on the left, there's free resources available if you want to learn more about each of these cons. Planet Lean, Roberto Priolo helped host a whole series of articles on the book that we did. So we're not saying to go out and buy the book. There's free resources that are there if you are interested in the book and learning more about this. If you're in the process development world, you can do that as well. It's in English and Italian. There's also some webinars out there that we've done with LEI, with Mark Raben in the Lean blog, and Eric's done some other webinars with KaiNexus. So there's a number of resources out there. And with that, though, I want to pause, and we have time for a couple of minutes here, Sharon, I think, for questions, if there are any, if anyone wants to put something into the chat. If not,
at the moment, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I think we've got some shy folk here. I'm not seeing any questions.
Well, one thing I would add real quick is, that last thing Matt touched on there, does the scoring provide the right help? Usually your first time through, it provides help, but not the right level of help yet. But because you've actually gone through a launch and seen what it didn't catch, and you can kind of reflect on, well, when could we have learned about that? That can allow you to start tuning that scoring in, so that when you actually do, going back to Matt's really early slide about when you do take what you learn and cycle back and now actually try to apply this lean process development framework, the next pass through, you will be in a much better place. And so if you go through this exercise and it helps you see some things, but there's a lot of things it misses, that's still good data that you can learn from that and adjust for the next cycle.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I'm getting from this is we can do all these things, but we really need to go out there and do them. We have to start, and it's great to have a place to start, but we really have to just get out there, get stuck in, roll up our sleeves, do it, and then we see amazing results. I'm still not getting any questions. Is everyone shy?
Yeah, it may not be clear where to put the questions either, right? There's the chat function,
Yeah.
Q&A. I'm not sure even if hopefully they're both enabled, but if not, that's fine.
No, they're open here, but
okay.
Okay, well,
and I know we're out of time anyway, so respect people's time here. So yeah, thanks to Sharon for hosting this, and Erica, any parting words?
No, thank you for joining, and I believe these presentations are going to be made available too. So there's free resources out there. Check them out.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really, really interesting, and it was such a good reminder of what we have to do, the basic understandings of it, and getting out there and just go and do it. Just go and do it. Do what they say, and you'll get somewhere. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.